I noticed the moving truck before I ever noticed him. It was a Wednesday afternoon, still cold enough that your breath made little ghosts in the air. And I was dragging my trash can to the curb when the big, dented white truck backed up to the old Watterson house at the end of our street. Good evening, friends. I'm Mr. Narratory, and I'll be your voice tonight as we drift gently towards sleep. If these stories help you relax and fall asleep a little easier, consider liking and subscribing. It really means a lot. Tell me in the comments, what time is it for you right now? And do you have any little bedtime rituals? Now, settle in, get comfortable, close your eyes if you'd like, because it's time for tonight's story. The house had been empty for years. Boarded windows, sagging porch, that sickly yellow paint curling away from the wood like peeling skin. Everyone said it was a miracle the city hadn't torn it down. So when I saw a truck pulling into that crumbling driveway, it caught my eye immediately. New blood in a dead house. You can't help but stare when something that shouldn't happen does. He emerged about 20 minutes later, hauling a single battered armchair out of the truck bed. Mid-40s, maybe a little older. Clean-shaven but rough around the edges. Wore a dark jacket zipped to the throat and a baseball cap pulled low. His movements were deliberatino, wasted energy, no hesitation. I watched from across the street, my hand still resting on the trash can lid, and felt something in my gut I couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear. Not yet. Just a ripple of something unnatural, something that didn't fit. Over the next few days, I kept noticing him in small ways. He didn't seem to have much furniture. No couch, no TV that I could see through the open door. Just that armchair and a mattress he carried in alone on the second evening, dragging it up the crumbling porch steps with a grunt loud enough that I heard it across the street. He never asked for help, never greeted anyone, and no one went to greet him. Maybe it was the house that set the tone. You don't go up to a house like that, not unless you have a reason. The neighborhood was quiet enough that any disturbance echoed. I heard hammering late one night soft, rhythmic, like someone fixing loose floorboards. Another night, there was a metallic scraping sound, long and slow, like dragging something heavy across the hardwood. I tried to tell myself it was normal. Moving in, renovations, a new start. But even then, some part of me knew better. You can't fix rot with a hammer. One evening, about a week after he moved in, I caught him standing in the backyard, not doing anything, just standing there, staring up at the dying oak tree that twisted over the fence line. He didn't move for at least 10 minutes. I know because I watched from my living room window, one hand unconsciously pulling at the curtain's edge like a nervous tick. He stood there until the last light bled from the sky, then turned and went back inside without once looking toward the street. Curiosity gnawed at me. I told myself I was being neighborly, but it wasn't that. It was the wrongness that kept pulling at me. So, one afternoon, I walked by the house, slow and casual, pretending to be out for a stretch. The porch sagged under my weight when I set one foot on the first step. I didn't go further. I just looked up close. The damage was even worse than it looked from across the street. Black mold bloomed at the edges of the wood. The front door was new, though. Heavy, dark-stained oak with a fresh, shiny brass knob. It didn't fit. Nothing about this man fit. There was no mail in his box, no packages on the step, no signs of friends visiting or delivery trucks stopping by. He had no garbage cans out on collection day, no lights in the upper windows, just that one chair in the living room, and him, always him. About 2 weeks after he moved in, something changed, small at first. I started seeing cars idling near the end of the block late at night. Old cars, beat up, their engines rumbling low. Sometimes they'd sit there for 5 minutes, sometimes longer. Once, I saw one of them flash its headlights twice before pulling away. I never saw anyone get out. Never saw anyone go in. Just the cars and the silence. Then, one night, I saw something else. I woke up around 2:30 a.m., restless. The way you do when your mind won't let go of something it doesn't fully understand. I went to the kitchen for water, and as I passed the front window, I saw the porch light at the Watterson house flicker on. The man stood in the doorway, framed by the light, and behind him, just for a second, I swear, I saw movement, something shifting deeper inside the house, not a shadow, something else, something that moved like it was waiting. I dropped to the floor without thinking, heart hammering against the hardwood. I waited breathless for what felt like an eternity. When I finally dared to peek again, the porch light was off. The door was shut. The house was dark and silent. But I knew what I had seen. And suddenly, the new neighbor didn't feel like a mystery anymore. He felt like a warning. The next morning, I tried to tell myself that I hadn't really seen anything at all, that my brain, fogged with sleep and paranoia, had stitched shadows into something that wasn't there. But deep down, I knew better. There are things you can ignore in daylight that refuse to be forgotten once the sun goes down. I spent the day watching the house from my front window, pretending to read, pretending to scroll my phone, all the while keeping one eye on the cracked yellow wood and the black mouth of the front door. The man didn't leave the house all day. I didn't see the cars again either. Just the stillness, heavy and oppressive like the sky before a tornado. Around dusk, I saw him step onto the porch. He stood there for a long time, looking up and down the street, like he was waiting for something or someone. He had a cigarette pinched between 2 fingers, but he never lit it, just held it like a prop. When he finally turned and went back inside, I noticed something I hadn't before. There was a faint, dark stain on the sleeve of his jacket. Not paint, not oil. Something darker, heavier. The kind of stain that soaks into fabric and never really washes out. The next few days blurred together. Nothing obvious happened, but the feeling of wrongness sharpened. I caught glimpses of him through the window late at night, sometimes sitting in the armchair, sometimes just pacing the living room. No TV, no sound, just pacing back and forth, like a caged thing trying to wear down its chains. Once I saw him standing perfectly still facing the corner of the room, forehead nearly touching the wall, standing there motionless for almost 20 minutes before disappearing from sight. I stopped sleeping properly. Every creak of the house made me sit up straight in bed. Every gust of wind rattling the window made my skin crawl. I started to dream about the house. Not dreams of horror, not blood and monsters, but dreams of emptiness. Endless, empty rooms stretching out forever, each one darker and colder than the last. And somewhere deep in the maze, I knew he was waiting for me. A week after the light incident, I decided to walk past the house again. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. Needed to see if maybe there was a rational explanation tucked somewhere inside the rot and mold. It was early evening, the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache. I pulled my hoodie up and kept my head down. When I reached the house, I slowed just enough to glance sideways, and that's when I noticed it. The basement window barely above the ground line. Someone had scraped away the grime from the inside, leaving a small clean circle as if someone was peeking out. I froze mid-step. Something shifted behind the glass. Not a shape exactly. More a flicker, like something pulling back into the shadows. I kept walking, heart slamming against my ribs so hard I thought it might shatter. When I got home, I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat in the dark with my back against the wall, my mind racing in ugly circles. The basement wasn't supposed to be accessible. The house inspection reports online said the foundation had collapsed partially years ago, that the city had deemed it unsafe for habitation. And yet here it was. Clear evidence that something or someone was down there. Maybe living, maybe hiding. I told myself to call the cops, to report a possible squatter. But the thought of explaining everything, of trying to make someone else believe this low, creeping dread, made my throat close up. Besides, I knew the kind of houses like that. The kind the city forgets. The kind where you have to prove there's something wrong before anyone will even bother to knock. So I waited and watched and told myself that if anything else happened, then I'd call. And something did happen. The very next night, just after 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Slow, deliberate steps crunching across the dead leaves on the sidewalk. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, listening as the steps moved closer, paused, moved again, closer still. There's a moment when you know someone isn't just passing by, when you can feel the weight of their gaze pressing against the wall. Whoever was out there wasn't just walking. They were looking, searching. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying they would move on. After what felt like hours, the footsteps finally faded away. When I dared to look, the street was empty again. But across the road, the porch light at the Watterson house flickered on for just a heartbeat and then snapped back to darkness. That's when I knew, beyond any doubt, that whatever was living in that house wasn't just content with lurking behind dirty windows anymore. It was reaching outward, and I was next. I didn't touch the note until well into the afternoon. I made breakfast I didn't eat, drank coffee that tasted like metal, paced the floorboards until they moaned in protest. Every few minutes, my eyes would flick to the front door, to the thin, white slip still wedged under the threshold like a toothpick in a wound. Eventually, I convinced myself that I needed to see it. Ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. Whatever message they had left, it was already inside my head, carving out space. With shaking fingers, I opened the door just enough to reach down and grab it. I shut the door quickly, locked it, double-checked the deadbolt. Then I unfolded the note, 5 words this time, written in the same scratchy, uneven hand. We're almost ready for you. I stared at it for a long time, reading it over and over until the words blurred together. Ready for what? I thought about calling the police, about finally dragging someone else into this nightmare. But what would I even say? That my neighbor had moved in and now there were threats appearing at my door? No names, no direct evidence. Nothing but my gut and a handful of ominous messages. I knew exactly how it would sound. Like paranoia. Like loneliness getting the better of me. And maybe it was. But even if it was, that didn't mean it wasn't real. That evening, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for them to come to me. I was going to the Watterson house. I needed to see it up close, to understand what I was really dealing with. The idea filled me with a cold, sinking dread, but it also gave me something I hadn't felt in days: purpose. I waited until the sun dipped below the rooftops and the streetlights flickered to life. I dressed in dark clothes, left my phone charging on the counter to avoid being tracked somehow, and slipped out the back door. I cut through a neighbor's yard, hopping the low chain-link fence, and made my way toward the house at the end of the street. Up close, it looked even worse than before. The siding sagged like rotted flesh. The windows wept black streaks down the walls. The porch tilted dangerously to one side. I crept up the steps, each board groaning under my weight, and tried the front door. Locked. Of course it was. I circled around to the side, heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. There, hidden between a crumbling bush and the foundation, was a side door. I turned the knob. It opened with a soft, wet creak. I stepped inside. The air was thick and sour, like mildew and something worse, something metallic and earthy that made my stomach lurch. I clicked on the small flashlight I'd brought and swept the beam around. The house was empty, hollowed out, stripped bare. No furniture beyond the battered armchair in the front room. No pictures, no curtains, just dust and darkness. I moved carefully, every step sending up little puffs of filth from the warped floorboards. In the living room, I found something that made me stop cold. A circle carved into the wooden floor. Rough, jagged lines gouged deep into the boards. Symbols I didn't recognize, spiraling outward from a charred black center. It looked old, but fresh enough that the edges still bled splinters. I crouched down, shining the light closer, and saw something glittering at the center of the circle. A ring, small, gold, crusted with something dark that might have been blood. I didn't touch it. I didn't even breathe. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. I killed the flashlight and pressed myself against the wall, heart in my throat. Another creak, closer this time. I strained my ears, trying to separate real sounds from the roaring of blood in my head. Whatever was up there, they were moving slowly, deliberately. I backed away from the circle, feeling my way toward the side door. The air felt heavier with every step, pressing against me like unseen hands. As I reached for the door, I made the mistake of glancing back. At the top of the stairs, half shrouded in darkness, stood a figure, still as stone. Watching me, I didn't wait. I tore the door open and sprinted into the night, not stopping until I reached the safety of my own porch. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, bolted it, and sat there on the floor, gasping for breath. When I finally looked up, my eyes caught something taped to the inside of my window. Another note, this one larger, scrawled in frantic, looping letters. Don't run. It wasn't a threat, it was a command, and I realized with a sick lurch that the game had changed again. They weren't just warning me anymore, they were pulling me in. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light on, the TV droning low just to have some sound in the room. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure at the top of the stairs, still and silent, its face swallowed by shadow. And worse, I kept replaying the words on that last note, "Don't run," as if they already knew what I would try to do next, as if running would only make things worse. I told myself that I needed to be smart, that I needed to find proof, something undeniable that could get the police to take me seriously. The ring in the circle, the strange symbols. There had to be something that could break through the wall of disbelief that always met stories like this. Around 4 a.m., I made a decision. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was going to go back to the Watterson house in daylight. No sneaking, no flashlights, no shadows. I would walk right up to the front door, knock if I had to, and find out exactly what was going on. I spent the morning trying to convince myself it was a good plan, that the figure on the stairs had just been the man himself caught in the flashlight's beam, nothing more. That the circle was just graffiti, old vandalism left by teenagers. That the notes could have been the work of some twisted kid down the block. That everything could still make sense if I just stopped thinking like a victim. I set out around noon. The street was mostly empty, the usual sleepy weekend lull hanging over the neighborhood. I walked slowly, deliberately, heart hammering in my chest, but legs steady. When I reached the Watterson house, I paused only briefly before stepping up onto the porch. The wood creaked under my weight. I raised my hand and knocked. 3 sharp raps. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. After a minute, I tried the door. It swung inward with a drawn-out groan. I hesitated on the threshold, every instinct in my body screaming at me to turn back. But I stepped inside. The house looked the same as before, bare, filthy, silent. I called out, my voice shaking more than I liked. "Hello? Anybody here?" No answer. I moved through the front room, flashlight in hand, even though the midday sun streamed through the cracked blinds. Dust motes floated like tiny ghosts in the light. I found myself drawn toward the stairs, toward the place where I had seen the figure. The steps groaned under my weight as I climbed. Halfway up, the air grew colder, sharper. Like the difference between breathing indoors and stepping into a freezer, I reached the second floor and paused. The hallway stretched out to either side, lined with closed doors. I picked one and opened it. Empty room, bare floor, crumbling walls. Nothing. I tried the next door. Same, then the next, until I reached the final door at the end of the hall. This one was different, newer, the paint less chipped, the handle less rusted. I turned it slowly. The door swung open to reveal a small room, maybe once a bedroom, now stripped of everything but a battered metal chair bolted to the floor in the center. And chained to that chair, head bowed, was a man, alive, barely. His wrists were bound tightly with zip ties, his ankles too. He was filthy, gaunt, his clothes torn and blood-stained. For a moment, I was too stunned to move. He lifted his head slowly, eyes blinking against the light. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Panic surged through me. I rushed forward, fumbling for a knife, anything to cut him free. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me, coming up the stairs. I turned, heart in my throat. Standing in the hallway was the man from the moving truck. The man who had moved into the Watterson house. He smiled, calm, patient, like he had all the time in the world. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. I backed into the room, placing myself between him and the man in the chair. "What is this?" I demanded, voice breaking. He didn't answer. He just stepped closer. And then I saw the object in his hand. A syringe, full of something dark and thick. My body reacted before my mind caught up. I slammed the door and threw the bolt. There was a bolt, thank God. Rusted but still strong. I turned to the captive man, slicing through the zip ties with my pocket knife, hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. He winced but didn't cry out. We needed to move. Now. The man outside pounded on the door once, twice, a sound so loud it rattled the frame. "You don't understand," he called through the wood. "You're ruining everything." I ignored him. I got the man in the chair to his feet. He was weak, half dragging, but he could move. Together we stumbled toward the window. It was nailed shut. I smashed it with the butt of my flashlight, shards raining down onto the porch roof below. I climbed out first, then reached back for the captive man. We slid down the porch roof, landed hard on the front lawn, and didn't stop running. I didn't look back until we reached the next block. The Watterson house stood quiet and still in the distance, its windows like blind, unblinking eyes. There was no sign of pursuit, no shouting, no sirens, just silence. But I knew it wasn't over. I had seen too much. I had dragged someone else out of their nightmare, and whatever had been waiting inside that house, it wasn't going to let us go so easily. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road where traffic buzzed and the sidewalks actually felt alive again. I flagged down the first passing car, a dented sedan driven by a middle-aged woman with tired eyes who barely hesitated before letting us in when she saw the state we were in. I told her to drive us straight to the police station, the urgency in my voice cutting through any questions she might have had. The man I had pulled from the Watterson house slumped against the door, silent, his chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. His wrists were raw, where the zip ties had been, deep red grooves cutting into the skin, and his clothes smelled like blood and mold. I kept glancing over my shoulder as we drove, half expecting to see that green-jacketed figure loping after us, syringe still clutched in his hand, that patient smile still on his face. But the streets behind us remained clear, like the nightmare had been folded neatly back into the shadows where it belonged. At the station, everything moved in a blur. Officers ushered us into a side room. Questions came rapid fire. Who was I? What happened? Where had we come from? Who was the man with me? I tried to answer, stumbling over my words, giving them everything I could. About the Watterson house, the man who moved in, the notes, the figure in the house, about the captive, about the circle carved into the floor and the ring lying at its center. They listened more closely than I expected. Maybe it was the bruises on the rescued man's wrists. Maybe it was the look in my eyes. Either way, within an hour, there were squad cars screaming down our street. I rode along with them, heart hammering in my throat, expecting the worst. But when we arrived, the house stood silent and still, the porch sagging in familiar disrepair. The front door swung gently in the breeze. The side door hung open too. The house was empty. No sign of the man, no sign of anyone. The battered armchair was gone. The circle in the living room floor had been sanded away, leaving only rough scarring behind. The upstairs room where I found the prisoner was stripped clean. No chair, no chains, no broken window. It was as if everything had been scrubbed in the time it took me to reach safety. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but filed their reports dutifully. A search was launched for the man fitting my description. Flyers went up. Questions circulated through the neighborhood, but days turned into a week, and no one found him. No sightings, no fingerprints, no digital trail. It was like he had never existed at all. They tried to reassure me, told me I had done the right thing, that the important thing was saving the man from the chair, getting him medical help, that sometimes monsters slip through the cracks, but eventually, justice catches up. But I didn't believe it. I could still feel the weight of his stare through the darkness, could still hear his voice telling me I didn't understand, that I was ruining everything. I tried to go back to normal, tried to work, to eat, to sleep, but normal wasn't waiting for me anymore. I kept waking up at odd hours, heart hammering, convinced I heard footsteps outside my window. A knock at the door with no one there. The sound of breathing in the hallway. I knew it wasn't over. I knew he was still out there somewhere, waiting, watching. I started carrying a pocket knife everywhere I went, installed cameras around my house, moved my bedroom to the back of the house where there were fewer windows. Friends and co-workers said I looked tired, worn down. I lied and said I was just busy. They wouldn't understand the truth. That once you see a monster step out from behind the curtain of normal life, you never really stop seeing them. That night, about 3 weeks after the rescue, I found something waiting for me when I got home. It was tucked neatly into the center of my doormat. A small, battered box, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with rough twine. No postage, no return address. My stomach dropped into my shoes. I knew immediately who it was from. I brought it inside carefully, heart slamming against my ribs, and set it on the kitchen table. I stared at it for a long time before working up the nerve to open it. Inside was something that made my blood run cold. A Polaroid photograph, a fresh one. It showed me sleeping, curled up on my couch, the blanket twisted around my legs, taken from outside the window, taken at close range, and scrawled across the bottom of the photo, in the same scratchy, frantic handwriting as the notes, was a single word: soon. I sat down heavily, the room spinning around me. He had been here. He had never left. The game wasn't over. It had only been paused. Now it was starting again. The plan wasn't complicated. I knew he would come back. Knew he couldn't resist. His pattern had become predictable in its obsession. Always between 2 and 3 a.m. Always creeping closer. Always testing. I turned off all the lights in the house that night, made everything look abandoned. I left the back door unlocked, just enough to give him hope, to make him bold. I sat in the darkest corner of the living room with the knife in my hand and waited. Time crawled. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind made my heart stutter. But I stayed still. I stayed patient. And then, just after 2:30, I heard it. The faintest whisper of movement outside. Shoes scraping against concrete. The soft groan of the porch steps under weight. The door handle turning slowly. And then, silence. He was inside. I heard him breathing before I saw him. Soft, slow, methodical. He moved through the hallway, past the kitchen, toward the living room, toward me. I tightened my grip on the knife, my palms slick with sweat. My mouth was dry. My muscles ached with tension. He stepped into the room. I could just make out his silhouette in the faint spill of moonlight from the window. He didn't see me at first. He just stood there, breathing, head tilted slightly, like he was savoring the moment. Then he took a step closer, and another. That was when I moved. I lunged from the shadows, every ounce of fear, rage, and exhaustion pouring into the motion. The knife found its mark before he could react, sinking deep into his side. He gasped, stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp that crashed to the floor in a shower of glass. I didn't wait. I tackled him, drove him to the ground, pinned him there. He struggled weakly, hands clawing at my arms, but he was already losing strength. I held the knife to his throat, breathing hard. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw fear in them. Real fear. Not the fake, taunting confidence he wore before. He tried to speak, but only a wet, gurgling sound came out. I stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, staring down at him, feeling the weight of all the nights he had stolen from me pressing against my chest. I thought about finishing it right there, about ending it in the simplest, most final way possible. But I didn't. I forced myself to move, to pull back, to grab my phone and call the police. I told them what happened, voice shaking but clear. When they arrived, they found me sitting on the floor, the knife tossed aside, the man bleeding and unconscious but alive. They cuffed him, took him away. The paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher, and even as they did, he kept his eyes locked on me. A look not of hatred or fear, but of something worse. Possession. Like in his mind, this wasn't over. Like he still believed I belonged to him. The police found evidence in his pockets. Keys. A map of the neighborhood with my house circled. Photographs. Dozens of them. Of me. Walking, sleeping, sitting at my kitchen table. Living my life unaware. They said he had been planning something much worse. That I had stopped it just in time. That I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow, broken, shattered into pieces too small to put back together. They asked if I wanted to press charges. Of course I did. They assured me he would never come near me again, that he would be locked away somewhere he couldn't hurt anyone. I nodded and signed the papers, but deep down I knew better. Men like him don't stop. They just wait. They bide their time behind bars, behind locked doors, behind walls of steel and stone. They dream, they remember, they plan. It's been 6 months now. The neighborhood looks the same. Kids on bikes, mailmen trudging their routes, curtains fluttering in the breeze, normal. But I know normal is just a mask. At night, I still check the locks 3 times. I still keep a knife under the cushion. I still wake up to shadows that aren't there. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear a sound that freezes the blood in my veins. A soft knock, 3 times, from somewhere just beyond the walls of my house. And I wonder if he's still waiting, if he ever really left at all. That's our story for tonight, friends. You're safe now. Sleep deeply, dream sweetly, and I'll see you again soon. Good night.